Yes, indeed. Here we go. Another day. I just realized you're in a red sweatshirt. You look kind of holiday like. I'm in a black shirt right now, black and blue leggings, always bringing the dark side to things.
You didn't say that you're always in this red sweatshirt. That's the important part. I'm in this red sweatshirt since I got back from Thailand because it's cold. And when I mean cold, I mean 70 degrees. Okay. So
I know I'm freezing my ass over here in California right now. Anyway, um, so today, Erin and I would like to share with you. We want to talk to you about receiving. We want to talk to you about what are you subscribing to, and just this general idea of busyness and where we're pulling our stories about our worth and our value from. So, one of the things that Erin and I have learned is that when we spend too much of our time in the past or too much of our time in the future thinking about the things to come, we're not present. And since it's getting close to Christmas, it's this coming weekend, we want to talk about presence because really, presence is hopefully, we'd love to see it be a 365 day a year thing, right? We'd love
yeah,
to
for sure.
see people be present because it's in the present where all the really good presents are, right? So, as always, we want to start the podcast out by just take a moment and bring your awareness to be here with us now. I went out this morning and I grabbed a Starbucks, and while I was driving in the car, my mind started to drift off to other things. My mind started to think about some of the information that I learned last night around, um, kind of how long we were staying, where we're at currently. And I was like, wait a minute, where are you at? And so I called my awareness back. And as I was driving, I was just saying, here, now, be here, now. Notice your breath. Be here now. You can meditate and drive, by the way. This kind of meditation is like, be here now. Be present. Be aware. Know where you're at right now. Because when our minds want to drift off into the thing that we're going to, the laundry list of things that we believe what we have to do, we're telling ourselves this internal narrative of, I'm so busy. There's just not enough time. I've got so much to do. We are not present and we are not receiving our presence or the presence that being fully aware of where you are right now has to offer. So,
I just want to say in real time, I 100% was not present during your meditation because my dog is snoring and I'm still trying to like figure out my earpiece. And I'm like, isn't this fascinating? Like, this is what, and then it just being a choice, right? Like, I'm going to put my wired not AirPods, but I'm going to put my wired headphone
earbuds.
in
Yeah.
earbuds. Yeah. And I'm just going to let the dog snore behind me and it's okay. And just focusing on like, I think we've talked about this before, but people think meditation, I think at least I did. I thought meditation was like, oh, my mind's going to be like completely clear. And it's just going to be like this, and it's not, right? It's not, that's not necessarily what meditation is or what it's for. And it's not a problem that your mind drifts and that you continuously bring it back. Like it is a practice, right? In the beginning, you're going to feel like you're like hoarding herding cats is what it's going to feel like, right?
Yep.
Because it's just going to be everywhere. And before you know it, you're like, I'm not even here again. It's not a problem.
Yeah.
So
It's like taking the toddler for a walk.
bringing it
Oh,
back.
what's this over here? What's this over there? I want to go put my foot in this puddle. I want to, yeah, yeah.
So
So this is a practice that it took me a while to remember. I have to remind myself um, to just be present where I'm at because, like many people, my mind is constantly chatting, um, kind of like how I am on the outside, I am on the inside, right? Um, and the stories that we tell matter. I just did a post on this on Instagram today. The stories that we tell matter because it's the stories that we tell that create matter. It is what creates our reality. And so when we are in this place of constantly saying, I'm so busy, there's not enough time, that is exactly the thing that we're creating. I remember sitting actually in the Big Island um, airport. I was reading a Deepak Chopra book, and he was talking about time. And I remember at that time, I was having all kinds of issues with, like, I'm just so busy all the time. There's just not enough time for me to get this done. And I'm like, well, how do I stop telling myself I don't have enough time? I don't have enough time to stop telling myself I don't have enough time. It was kind of comical. And so it just made me think of that because you were sharing, Erin, you were sharing your experience this last weekend, with having a kids' party at your house. And so, what was the experience, the little foursquare that you found yourself in
yeah.
with?
Before I go into that, I want to say something about one of the things, I don't know who I heard it from, but they said the life that you're living right now, that is a culmination of all of your thoughts and your beliefs up until this point. So if you want to think about how you used to think, look at your life right now.
Yep.
So if you want to change it, create something different, then obviously, we're all about, thinking differently, feeling differently. And for me, that was really powerful because I used to think, who's the girl that lives in Maui? But I don't spend any time asking myself that anymore. And so as a very specific example, right? Like, and when I make these or state these examples, obviously I'm not advocating, like, it's whatever it is for you, but I had to, like, well, what did I used to think? I used to focus on who's the girl that lives in Maui a lot, but I spend no time anymore thinking about that. Now it's like, who's the girl that lives in Maui and travels a lot, right? That's a different thought belief system I'm cultivating. And so for you, when you were saying that I don't have enough time to not think about not having enough time, right? It is obviously, it goes back to a practice, and it's also of, I think sometimes with affirmations, we can be like, well, I just need to start believing something that sometimes it feels so far stretched. And we talk a lot about like bridge thinking, like, who is the type of woman or man that, has time. And so for some of you, maybe if it doesn't, you need to always be checking in with your body and seeing if it feels true to you, because your body will tell you if it feels like, no, it doesn't feel true. And so
Yeah.
using some different types of bridge thoughts to get you until that does feel true to you. So this weekend, Grayson wanted to have a Christmas party, Santa exchange, all the things. And, we're up for anything. I'll try anything once. And, at drop off, we go out to meet, each parent that's dropping their child off. And Jason and I are in between two different families that are talking about how busy they are. and how much work they have to do and how stressful it's been and how they fall into bed and they, have no time and they just wake up and they're hit the ground running. And I used to be that person.
Yeah.
And also Erin now, how she unsubscribed to that. And I think before I used to sit quietly because I didn't want to say anything to what I would perceive as might upset someone, or someone might be like, well, easy for you to say, or, well, that's, all of the, I guess, beliefs or things that I've kind of had to work through and, let
Yep.
go of. And so now it's not trying to convince anyone. And also I'm not going to sit quietly and or participate participate in the conversation that you are leading, And so I just said, Jason and I do not subscribe to that type of lifestyle anymore. We opted out. And
what was their reaction?
there was some silence.
The dumbfound look, the like,
yeah, because
what?
I think that we as a society, at least in the Western society, we connect through air quotes struggle. We
Yes.
connect through, we're so busy. We connect through, oh, it's so hard. It's, I don't have enough time. We connect through lack at a very basic level, right? We connect through lack.
Ooh, giving me chills, girl.
Yeah. Who knew it was church on, what day is it? Monday. And so I, when I started my journey of just thinking about like, what do I want my life to look like? And I don't want to connect that way anymore. That is one of the things that in a previous podcast, I talked about, like not connecting with my parents anymore through all the things that are going wrong. I want to talk about, all of the things that are happening that feel amazing, that, how our kids are thriving, how our marriages are thriving, how our money is so abundant, all of those things. And I know it's going to be a little awkward at first, right? Because we're so used to talking about how it's not.
Yeah.
So, when they dropped the girls off, I just, I texted you and I'm like, we need to have a podcast on like, I'm unsubscribing from busyness, and through who I am and how I am valuable is not by my doing anymore. It's who I am. And I think a lot of us still find value, whether you're a workaholic or you're a stay-at-home mom that carts their kids to school and, Uber driver and all of the things. Where are you finding your value or believing your value is coming from?
Yeah. So as you were saying that, I just sort of I just surfed this wave with you while you were saying that, because as soon as you said about unsubscribing from that, my nervous system was aware that there's probably listeners right now that as soon as you said that had this sort of almost gut punch feeling. This sort of like, but okay, so I'm not going to connect. Like, how do I have contact with the people I care about? Or there was this, what I felt in my body when you said that was sort of this collective, like, oh shit. So I actually, it's even coming up to my throat now. What I want to invite you to share is, how did that feel initially when you made that choice, when you made that decision to be like, I don't want to connect through our misery and our suffering anymore. I don't want to connect that way. How did that feel initially for you?
I cried because I realized really when I realized that me and my dad, when we used to work together, we connected a lot through employees, money, business, for lack of a better word, struggle, right? And I was like, if I don't have that to talk to him about, how are we going to have a relationship? So the crying came from grief. I think, from sadness that like, so then we don't connect at all. Like this fear of, then we don't talk, we don't connect, there's no relationship. Like, what does that mean? And I didn't have to, when I say I had to, but one of the things that I practice is I got good at being in when I say stillness, what I mean is that relationship, or I should say pause. I was in the pause for a while. I didn't know what it was going to look like. I just knew I didn't want it to look like struggle and commiserating and how it doesn't work out anymore. And, that's just one example, but it was a pause. There wasn't a lot of conversation. It was silent sometimes. It was not calling each other. And from the basic human survival level, that feels like death, because we're not a tribe anymore. We're not, there's so many layers, with my dad. And when I say I had to be okay with it, what I mean is like, I had to be at peace with it. I had to get to the place of like, I know what I want my life to look like. And if that is the only way, which that's where your brain wants to go, right? Like, well, then how are we going to, it wants to go to the extreme. Like, well, then we're not going to have it. You're not going to have no one. Right. Mm-hmm. And I had to go to the place, like, if that's what it takes for Erin, then I'm willing to go there, which I know like that for Erin, that isn't as, I guess my wounds around that aren't as deep as some other things. So I know for some people that's a really big thing. But I was willing to sit in that pause for a while. And it's kind of like, you've talked about this before, but the fan, it's like you have to unwind it before you can change directions, right? So I had to feel the feelings that I had been maybe hiding or not feeling, to then rev up and decide, what do I want to feel? How do I want to connect?
Yeah. Had the same experience in my marriage and in my relationship with my daughter. When we initially realized that, like, it's through our awareness it's through our awareness and our presence. That's why awareness to me is so important. I want to know what I've been thinking and believing that's been running in the background outside of my awareness. Because the minute I start to become aware, the minute I am present with how I'm feeling, then I start to notice, what stories have I been telling and not even realizing I'm telling them, because they just feel like this is who I am.
It's who you are. Yeah.
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 And so, yeah, at first people like, we're not going to lie to you. We're not going to candy coat this. Sometimes it feels like shit, but if you're already feeling like shit, if you're already struggling, if you're saying, I'm just so busy, or things are just really difficult right now, or things are really challenging right now, we get it. We've been there. And you can choose to unsubscribe. You can choose to opt out. And people don't realize this. They think, well, then what? I'm just not going to talk to my family. And at first, it might look like that for a while. It might look like that for a long while.
Yeah.
I know my husband and I, we went through, it was probably it's been a couple years or so of the slowing down of the fan, of the, oh, I'm opting out of that, I'm unsubscribing from that belief, thought. the ways in which we connected before was usually me, um, like I just kept myself busy. My addiction was busyness
Mm-hmm.
because the more I did, the more
Mm-hmm.
valuable I made myself. So I thought. Um, and as I started peeling those beliefs, thoughts, feelings away, it felt like shit. Um, and then there came to that place of stillness. It's like what Erin was talking about with the fan is I've had this analogy that whenever we wanted to change the direction that our ceiling fan was blowing, depending on whether it was cold or hot, we would hit the reverse button. And if the fan was at high speed, we actually had to wait for the fan to slow down. It had to come to a complete stop before it reversed directions and started spinning itself up the other way. And this process of awareness, this process of choosing the stories that we're going to opt out of, the busyness, it's going to bring up some stuff. It's for sure going to bring up some stuff. And those things can be your gold if you allow them to be. This fertilizer, the shit that we're literally bringing up and out, can show up physically. It can show up in our health. It can show up in our relationships and the experiences that we have. It can show up in the circumstances that we think that we are presented with. And it is all this process of transformation, this process of, life doesn't have to be all suffering. But we got to be willing to be present. We got to be willing to see where we are, where we want to go, and allow ourselves to start having awareness about what have we been subscribing to. So I want to ask you, Erin, where are you at right now?
I wanted to say, I wrote down a couple things. One, everyone starts somewhere. So
Yes.
this is a space for everyone to get to see, like, it's not, when we talk about these things, it is not from a place of this is where we are, you're not here. It is from a place of we've been here in our own journey, on our own way, the way it looked for us. What does that look like? And illuminating that so you get to see that it happens to all the humans, right? And
Mm-hmm.
what is where is it showing up for you, right? So everyone starts somewhere and dropping the judgment, right? Number two, noticing where I had already experienced disconnection, because maybe 10, 12, 13, I don't know how many years ago, I decided to go plant-based. So there was already that, right? When I would go to parties and people would be like, well, why aren't you eating meat? And like the questioning, and then I don't drink. And then it's like, well, why aren't you drinking? Right. So there were already some muscles for me that had been built on what might be perceived as disconnection,
Mm-hmm.
and having to connect, right? And that was one of the things that my dad did say. He has said that numerous times. Like, I wish you guys would eat meat, because we used to go out and to, like, we would go out and eat, right? Like, eating is such a social event.
Mm-hmm.
And I have, yes, it is. And also, like, I have met with plenty of friends while they wanted to eat and I didn't. We went to a restaurant that was like, let's just say it's a barbecue place. And I'm like, I'll just drink some tea and we can just hang out. Like, connection for me is not in the doing, it is in the being of two humans connecting, right? Through our conversations, through our souls, through, and so I had already noticed, like, oh, this is also a place where, and we can use it against us, right? Like, I already don't fit in, I already don't connect with a lot of people, or we can use it for our, higher good, if you want to call it that, and be like, okay, like, you did find a way to connect with people, even though you don't eat meat, you still find a way that, if people want to drink, you don't have, I don't have any judgment on that, whatever, right? Like, there's so it's using it to your advantage and empowerment, not in a taking away or a disempowerment. The other thing is too, my muscle wasn't built up with struggle with work. Like that was maybe, if you want to call it, I don't want to say the last thing that I was like letting go of, but like that was the harder part for me too, because Jason would tell me like, you don't have to answer your phone. And I'm like, but you don't understand. Like I wanted to fight for my struggle, the limitations and my struggle, right? Like I wanted to fight for the struggle. And what I realized is, and even though he doesn't coach, he does, because he's like, what are you feeling in your body? Like your heart rate, I can even sense you right now. Your heart rate is so, you're recreating this. I mean, he said this like 5 or 6 years ago. He's like, Erin, you're literally recreating the same conversation you had 7 hours ago. And we're in bed trying to go to bed now. And here you are all hot and fired up again. And noticing that every time I would tell that story, whatever it was that I was frustrated with, right? Yes, we need to process our feelings and our emotions. And also how much of it are we continuing to recreate because we want to keep that story alive?
It's habitual.
Yes.
It's like an addiction.
It is an addiction because your body, and Tanya can talk more about this, but your body and the receptors on your cells are used to whatever primary emotions you feel on a consistent basis.
Yep.
So anger and frustration and fear are probably my most top 3.
Addictions.
My body knows those receptors. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So when I hadn't been feeling those emotions in a while, it was like, oh, let me serve you up some anger.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just this loop. So it is a choice. It is a practice. And it's not something that's like, it wasn't like it was, I decided I chose it and then I practiced it and it was just perfect. Like it was messy and it still is messy, right? Yep. But it's in that noticing of, here I am again, I have a choice. And here we go back to your comment about awareness. Okay, this is happening in real time when your awareness gets to that point. Because at first your awareness is going to be after the fact, it already happened. And then you're like, oh, this is what I did, right? And then your awareness moves to like in real time, like, okay, we're having this conversation. I don't want to be having this conversation. What do I want to choose in this moment? And then as your awareness grows, it's like, before we even flip the lid and, go off, we're like, okay, I see what's happening here. What am I choosing? So yeah, I just wanted to make those 3 comments because I was like, I just thought they were important to say.
Yeah. So where do you notice yourself now? Like, where are you at with your relationship with your parents? What do you notice has changed?
I think that they still want to go there.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference is, instead of us, they were making some comments about my aunt and, some family members and health issues. And before I would actually ask questions, I would engage in that conversation. And this most recent time, Jason and I were on a FaceTime and we just sat there and let her talk. And then when she was done, then we just started talking about something else. We just did not feed into that. And then my dad, started talking about shark attacks and surfing. And I was like, okay. And then on to another. And I think for me, what it looked like is I used to want to meet fight with fight. And now what I'm working on is just meeting, anger or fight with peace. Like, okay, if he wants to talk about that, he can explain it or talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the thing too. It's like, I feel like for people that it's coming from a wanting to help place.
Mm-hmm.
It's coming from a loving place. Like him telling me, be careful on my surfboard, there's shark attacks. It's coming from I love you very much. I don't want you to get eaten.
Yeah.
And also we know that the law of attraction is the more we focus on what we don't want, the more we get what we don't want. And I think it's so subtle, because I was brought up like, I was brought up like, you don't want this. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about how you don't want it, but that creates more of that versus that is only there to provide us with the contrast to show us what we do want. And then we start spending our time, our energy, and our focus on what we do want.
Yeah. We've talked about this, this idea of preventing or having to clean up afterwards. I
Yes.
want to maybe come back to that. When you were talking about how you would just listen
Yes.
and then move on to the next subject.
Yes.
What I really want to highlight for our listeners here is this is that stillness in between. This still allows for that connection. We have disconnected from the story that we have to share in the suffering, in commiserating, relating to the issue, and the presence piece is so important because sometimes just giving someone your presence, and in that moment, there's a few things happening. First of all, you're being present with your parents,
Yes.
and that is connection.
Yes.
You are not having to change their belief or say, stop talking about this. I don't want to hear this. Preventing.
Can I say something about that? There was a time
Absolutely.
when for myself, Erin, when she was learning how to move through this process, I did have to say that. I had to say, if you're going to talk about these specific things, I love you and I'm not going to engage in the conversation and the conversation's going to stop. So for me, almost kind of like, when they talk about the airplane, like put your face mask on first, like that's what I had to do for myself when I was moving through those levels, if you want to call it, or,
Yeah.
along the path. I had to say that to my mom, like, we're not talking about grandpa anymore. I love you. I love him. And I'm just not going to go there.
Yeah.
And now it's like, she can talk about him all she wants and it's okay. And I don't have that emotion, right? That triggering anger emotion, because I allowed myself, like you're talking about, that space to allow myself to work through that.
Yeah. That basically keys into another concept that we talk to our clients about, which is that in the very beginning of this practice, in the very beginning, we have to almost like erect these big wall boundaries that we're just
Yeah.
like, I'm a hard no for this right now.
Yes. Yes.
And that could be extremely uncomfortable for those of us who have not learned boundaries.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we find ourselves triggered in a puddle on the floor before we can be like, oh, that's right. I'm practicing a boundary. I'm practicing saying, I don't want to talk about this, or I'm practicing saying, I hear you and I don't agree with you.
Yep.
Um, it's that kind of like bringing up the boundary first. And as we start feeling more safe and secure within ourselves, we can then start lowering it down to a good neighbor fence. And then after that, we've got just this cute little white picket fence out front. And then pretty soon we're like, I don't need no fences. I don't need no boundaries because I feel safe within myself. You can continue to have your beliefs and I can just continue to love you.
Yes.
I can let you say what you want to say, and my presence here, I don't have to refute, argue, disagree. Um, right? I can listen, I can be present, and I can be quiet. I can allow
Yes.
that silence to exist and know that it doesn't mean that like I don't need to be agreeing with you. I don't need
Yeah.
to be um oh my gosh, I know I'm so busy too, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. I had the same, a similar thing happen for me with my husband and my daughter. In the beginning, when I started this work, I had to put up some boundaries. I had to protect myself first. And for me, that looked like I'm really busy. I can't talk right now.
Mm-hmm. Mhm.
right? This thing that, and my busyness was I gotta go, I gotta sit here and meditate for an
Meditate.
hour, or um, I need to journal. I need to move my body. Um, so I, that's how kind of I put up a wall at first. So I just wanted our listeners to hear that it can show up in a variety of ways. Like we can be talking about our busyness, which I did for many years. And then I came out of that busyness and I was in a lot of stillness, and I started growing my stillness. Before, stillness was my boundary.
Mhm.
Instead of, like, I almost kind of used the excuse of busyness, but it was busy with my stillness.
Is busy with yourself. Yeah.
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 Um, Before I got to the point where I felt strong enough to start voicing a little bit of disagreement.
Mhm.
Um, for me, it didn't show up as, and it's the same thing as what you experienced, but it didn't show up for me as, if this is what you're going to talk about, I'm not going to talk about this, right? For me, it
Yeah.
showed up as being able to say, I hear you and I have a different viewpoint, or I hear you, I see you, and for me, I feel differently. I disagree. For me, speaking up rather than ending the conversation was my sort of growth edge, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
for me, opting out in the beginning, opting out, unsubscribing looked like me saying, yes, I hear you, and I don't agree.
Yeah.
Or for me, I have a different viewpoint. And then just being willing to feel all the discomfort that that would sometimes bring.
Yeah.
And it, for me, it also felt like shit. I
Yeah.
cried a lot. Um, I felt a lot of discomfort in my physical body. Um, Oftentimes, my stomach would be all kinds of messed up. Um, I found myself in the bathroom a lot. The term shitting one's pants was not foreign to me. Um, yeah, so it can show up in different ways, and it is a practice. It is a subtle shifting in how we interact, and that's going to look different at different phases. When we're starting to spin down the fan, it might be just not saying something, or it might
Not
be,
engaging. Hmm.
yeah, it might be speaking like, I acknowledge, I heard what you said, and I I don't personally agree, or I have a different point of view. Um, Before it then evolves into being the new person that you are. So, Erin's evolution looked like what? What would you say if you were to summarize what your evolution over the last couple of years has been?
It probably looked like, um, depending on what the topic was, right? Like the husband hasn't ever been, I was always silent because I didn't want to speak up and say, like, I have a wonderful husband when everyone else is talking about their husband. Because I didn't want to be portrayed as, yeah, easy for you, right? Like,
Must be
um,
nice.
must be nice. Yeah. So I would keep quiet about that. If it was something that I was struggling with, then I probably met it with passion, aka anger, with the other person, right? Like it would be a very passionate, involved conversation, but then that would just recreate and work up my nervous system and my emotions all over again. So it would just keep me stuck um in that same space. Yeah. And then as I decided, okay, like stripping away old Erin and like, okay, what does she want and what does it look like? It looked like like I talked about before in this podcast, right? Like, oh, I would have the conversation and be like, well, shit, that's not what I write. So then, okay, if I'm going to go see this person, or I'm going to go spend time with my parents, like almost playing it out in my mind ahead of time. Like, I know we're going to hang out on Saturday. I know they're going to want to talk about these things. What do you want to feel? And what do you want to think? And what do you want to say, Erin, when these things come up? Because they're going to come up. And so it was like practicing a play in my mind ahead of time. And then when it would happen, noticing what I was feeling in my body. So it was silence. It was stillness. It was, they were talking, and maybe I wasn't even focusing on the words anymore. It was, what is this emotion in my body? Where am I feeling this? Just really tuning into myself. And then it led to, having some of the, realizing, okay, what am I a no for right now to protect myself, and stating that.
Some really uncomfortable conversations.
Yeah, really, really uncomfortable conversations, because right and wrong is a big thing in my house. That is a belief.
Mm-hmm.
So
In your house
and
growing up.
also, huh?
In your house growing up.
Oh yeah. Oh, for right now, it's still a belief, and not in Erin's house, in my parents' house. It's still a belief. Right and wrong is still a belief. And also, here's the other thing. So when we say what we want or what we need, my camera like went out. Okay. When we say what we want or what we need, it can be perceived from the other person that we are saying they're doing it wrong, right? So I got met with a lot of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then it eventually gravitated to, I'm going to be here. I'm going to be present with you. You can share what you want, and I'm just not going to engage. I mean, if you put you put both of your hands together and one is pushing on the other, there is resistance, right? From both parties. But if you push on one and the other one is just peace and there and present, it can only go as far as the other person's willing to continue to. And there was no emotional, it's almost what it became to is like curiosity, right? Like my mom made a comment yesterday and I was like, what? Why would you tell me that? Like, what were you thinking that you wanted? And it I would say 9 or 10 times out of 10, it comes from like, I'm trying to be helpful. And so if we can get curious and just think about like, what is it that they are wanting to accomplish with this conversation or this, statement, then curiosity isn't a charged emotion, right? And
Correct.
And what I've had to learn though too is like, but you also have to feel, right? Like I didn't go from how I used to be to curiosity. I had to I had to meet it with anger. I had to meet it with frustration. I had to work through those emotions. So it's been obviously an evolution. What are we going on? Maybe 3 years now, 4 years? I can't remember, but a lot of asking myself, like, what do I want? What kind of relationship do I want? How do I want to feel when I go out with this person or my parents or whomever, right? Like, and asking those questions ahead of time, and also practice being that person on a daily basis. Because how we want to be, I think, for me, how we want to be with one person, for the most part, that's like how I want to be in my life, right? Like I want to be, when I ask myself my values, or when, one of the books I read, it was talking about like, if someone were to write a eulogy about you, like, what would you want them to say? And it was like, I want them to say that I'm loving and I'm kind and I was generous and that I was present. Like those are probably my top 4 things. So how do I want to practice that daily?
Yeah. And that's that presence. And everything that we talk about is in relationship. We talk about relationship, and sometimes that's with people, and sometimes it's with time. And so there are time, money, sexuality, parenting. It's all relationship.
Yes.
And when we're choosing to opt out or unsubscribe, sometimes it is like we realize that we're destroying a connection with someone. And maybe that's not a conscious awareness, but I'll just tell you that the destruction process oftentimes feels uncomfortable. It's dirty, it's messy, it feels kind of gross in the body, just like if you were remodeling a house. Keep in mind that we have to have the phases. We have to have a phase of destruction. We have to have a phase of like, we've cleaned up the mess and we just have the empty space before then we start installing what we want to be
Yep.
new.
Yep.
So just like when we're remodeling a house, our relationships with time, with money, with people, with food, anything.
Anything that any circumstance, it's just a relationship that we have with it, period.
So it's this process of stopping what we've been doing, examining it, being curious about it, being aware around it. Like, what have I been thinking and believing? Asking that question. Questions are wonderful to start bringing you evidence, to start showing you what it is that you're wanting to be inquisitive about. And so there's this process of starting to break down these beliefs, starting to deconstruct them, starting to basically kill them off so that we have that empty space. We do the demo. Then we move to that space of stillness, that space of contemplation, like, okay, I'm really clear about what I didn't want, and I've started breaking that down. What do I want to start thinking about what I do want, and still being very present with what is? I love what you said towards the beginning of this podcast about if you want to know what you've been thinking and believing, look at your current reality and it will show you what you've been thinking and believing. So if you're still having people come into your life that you're having conflicts with all of the time, it's not a problem. It's just showing you, hey, this is a spot you can work on. What other beliefs, what other thoughts, what other feelings might I be stuck in that are continuously bringing me this circumstance, this conflict, this busyness, this like whatever it is? Being present with where you are, giving yourself some space, some stillness, and then knowing like, okay, this is where I've been, this is where I'm going. And in that awareness, in that presence, you start creating the new. And then you can always just kind of keep checking back in. So for me, realizing that time was an issue, I had said, I don't want this to be the case. Like, I don't want to be creating more issues with this. It's kind of a subtle practice, and at the same time it takes a little efforting in the beginning of bringing into your awareness what it is that you want, what it is that you're moving towards, and not focusing on like, have I fixed it yet? Have I fixed it yet? And
Yeah.
how am I doing? Like, that's a lot of judgment and comparison.
Well, that's still just where you don't believe it, right? Like if you already believe that you had worked through that, you wouldn't be asking those questions, and you're wanting to look outwardly, right, into the 3D world to verify what you are trying to believe within.
Yeah. And so I just want to offer that with any of these things, we need to have gentleness,
Mm-hmm.
kindness,
Mm-hmm.
and compassion with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
because this isn't a one and done. This isn't a I fixed it.
It's your
Now I'm
lifetime pass, actually.
oh my gosh. I sent for our listeners, I sent Erin an Instagram. I can't remember who it was. Otherwise I would
Tell me what
announce
it
it.
is, and I'll tell you who it was.
It's the gal dancing, and she was like, "Oh,
Oh,
I think I
yes.
got this all fixed." And then
Yes.
then she was like, "And I'm done." She's like wiping her hands like she's
I'll put the
dancing.
link in the show notes. That
Yeah.
way they can I'll tag that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
if it was a reel,
Yeah.
if it would go away or not.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, she was like dancing, and then this text would come up about, I started to work on myself and I've healed myself and we're all good, done. And then she's turns to start walking away, and then here she comes dancing back again. She's like, "Oh, and then there's generational trauma, and then there's this, and then there's that," right? So the idea is that we're never done. And when you look at where Erin was for so many years versus Erin that decided to make the changes, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not that you don't revisit these things, right?
Oh,
But if you had to choose between, I mean, every once in a while we're like, ignorance was
yeah.
bliss.
Can I not be aware anymore? Because sometimes it's just like constantly, like if you've ever played tennis and you just have like your coach just like loads the balls and they're just like constantly, hammering at you. It's like, can we just stop? Like, when does the machine stop? That's sometimes how I feel. Like, can I just be unaware? Which I say that jokingly, but never, right? Like, I would never want to go back to how it was because I
Yeah.
felt so disempowered, right? There were parts of
Yeah.
me that felt so disempowered. At least now it's like, okay, I know what I'm working with here, and I know I have the option to change it if I want to.
Yeah.
So sorry, I interrupted you, but I mean,
No,
like,
you
yeah, like,
didn't.
who would I go back? Who would I go back? I would never go back. And this is the other thing. It took me 39 years, 37 years, however many years, 38 years to create it. And yes, it'll take us a lifetime when I say it's a lifetime, I don't mean it's going to take all that time to uncreate it, right? Like, I feel like I've just like exponentially changed. But things are always going to keep coming up, right? It's just going to be at a deeper level, and it's not as heavy as it used to feel. It doesn't last as long. I mean, we talk about this on every podcast, I feel like, right? Like the recovery of it, when we notice it, when we go through it, I was even thinking about this, which is not part of this podcast, and I want to say it, is that now that I've been to Thailand for a month by myself with my family, I'm like, oh, telling them that like, hey, I might want to go again. Like, once you've gone there, it's so easy you never go back, right? Like, just so the
Not in
conversation.
the same way. Yeah. You don't
Yeah.
go back in the same way.
Yeah.
You're forever changed. So
Yeah.
you're always evolving and growing, and it gets easier over time to do the things that you're just like, oh my gosh, that was so hard.
Yeah.
And the reason that we call ourselves Who University is because everyone wants to ask how. How
Yeah.
do I do this?
Yep.
How do I start unsubscribing? How do I start opting out? How do I start changing? How do I start being aware? And that's the thing, is how's not going to get you anything different than what you've ever had.
Yeah.
We have to start asking ourselves, who would we be? So who would we be if we weren't so busy?
Mm-hmm.
Who would we be if we were empowered by our time rather than disempowered by our time?
And newsflash, what might come up is like blank computer screen in your mind when you ask yourself those questions for the first time. Okay. So not a problem, right? Like, we literally don't know who that person is because we have practiced being the opposite or, someone else for so long. So when you ask yourself these questions that Tanya's saying, it's like, it's okay to sit in the silence. And I think that is something that's really important to say, because I think we want answers immediately. And one of the things that I've gotten better at is like, I don't have an answer right now, and I'm still okay. And it's working out and I'm figuring it out. And so continue.
I've survived everything up to this point, right? Like all of the things I have survived. I'm here another day. I talk about living a lifetime in a day. There's a start, there's a middle, and there's an end. There's no guarantee that we're going to wake up the next morning. And so with this practice, asking, who would I be if? Who would I be if I weren't so busy? Maybe that's a good place to start. Who would I be if I had more time for me? Who would I be if I had more connections in my life? Who would I be if I had more intimacy? Like, what is it that you want for your life? And if you've just been so busy doing who you are, you don't know who you be. So I want to leave our listeners with lots of questions. Ask yourself, who would I be? What is the thing that you say all the time? What is that thing that you're like, I'm always busy. We don't have enough money. I'll do that when I'm feeling better. When I lose this weight, I will, right? So asking yourself, who would I be if I had more time? Who would I be as a healthy person? Who would I be in a body that feels good? Who would I be if I believed I had enough money? Who would I be? What would I be doing if I felt all my needs were met? Who would I be if I felt safe in this world? So I want to leave you with those questions. Keep asking, who would I be? Who is the girl that lives in Maui? Who is the girl that has vibrant health? Who is the girl that travels? Who is the girl that has intimate, deep, connected relationships? Who is the man that gets to pursue his passion? Who is the little boy that gets to display his emotions and feel safe? All the questions. Who do you want to be? And on that note,
Go grab my tissues. Until next time.
until next time, sending you all love.
Love to all.